Hi, this is Dr. Gregory Sadler. I'm a professor of philosophy and the president and founder of an educational consulting company called Reason.io, where we put philosophy into practice. I've studied and taught philosophy for over 20 years, and I find that many people run into difficulties reading classic philosophical texts. Sometimes it's the way things are said or how the text is structured. But the concepts themselves are not always that complicated, and that's where I come in. To help students and lifelong learners, I've been producing longer lecture videos and posting them to YouTube. Many viewers say they find them useful. What you're currently watching is part of a new series of shorter videos, each of them focused on one core concept from an important philosophical text. I hope you find it useful as well.
A good portion, perhaps even we could say the majority of Chapter 4 in Thomas Hobbes' work Leviathan is taken up with what he calls names, and specifically with what we do with names. Now, he's using it in a broader sense than we're used to thinking about, because we talk instead about, for example, nouns, or, we extend it into the world of thought and we talk about ideas or concepts. He's using name for more than what we usually we'll think of, the name of a person. I'm Greg Sadler. He would say we can name things like chalkboard. That is a name of sorts, and it doesn't just designate the chalkboard I'm standing in front of. It designates chalkboards all over the place. So he is going to tell us that we use speech, and we could extend this to written language as well, or really any form of communication. We impose names and their connections. So we're not just interested in names on their own, we're interested in how we can string them together, how we can use language. And he's going to tell us that some names are proper. So these are the things that we typically think of as names. Peter, John. Now notice what else he says. This man, this tree. So what we might call deictic language, where we're pointing, that's also a proper name. So this chalkboard, or this word, this book, those are individual or proper names. And then we have what we're using more often, universal names. And he says that one universal name is imposed on many things, right? And why do we do this? There's some sort of similitude. That's a similarity in some quality or other accident, whereas a proper name bringeth to mind one thing only. Universals recall any one of those many. So we could talk about tie. I'm wearing a tie right at this moment. It has certain characteristics. It is this tie that I've had for quite a while. I forget exactly where I got it, what the circumstances are, but it's different than other ties that I have. And this particular pattern of tie is not unique. If we were going to describe it, we could get, quite detailed, but there would be probably thousands, tens of thousands of this tie, so we could be using a universal term for that. So he says that of names universal, some are more and some of less extent, the larger comprehending the less large. So, for example, we use the term body, or physical thing. And that is of wider, or as he's going to say, larger signification than the word man. And it includes it. And the names man and rational, they, according to Hobbes, are of equal extent comprehending mutually one another. Now he's actually slipping up there a little bit, because Hobbes officially believes in God. And so rational, presumably God would also be included in that. But you get where he's going with this. So they can vary in extent, and this is, quite important for us. So he says, by this imposition of names, some of larger, some of stricter signification, we can turn the reckoning of consequences imagined in the mind. So reckoning is a key idea. Thinking through, we could say, into a reckoning of the consequences of appellations. When we call something something, we are using a name, and that allows us to think out what is involved in that. So he uses triangle. A person who can't communicate can see triangles, but they're not going to grasp them under a universal concept. So they can derive by looking at this triangle. Hobbes says that the angles add up to 2 right angles, but they're not going to be able to transpose that or transfer that to other triangles. They would have to keep doing that over and over and over again. Why? Because they can't say the general terms. Every triangle has 3 angles equal to 2 right angles. We do this all the time, and we take this for granted, don't we? So he says, a great instance of this is numbering. He says, a natural fool that could never learn by heart the order of numeral words like 1, 2, 3 may observe every stroke of the clock and nod to it or say 1, 1, 1, but they can never know what hour it strikes. Being able to do mathematics depends on this universalizing that happens through language. And he goes on, and he says that, some nations have smaller amounts of numbers than others. The person who doesn't have numbers won't be able to add and subtract and perform other operations of arithmetic. Without words, no possibility of reckoning of numbers. And if you can't reckon numbers, you can't really reckon magnitudes, sizes, of things, swiftness, force, or other things, right? So that's pretty important. Moving on, he says, okay, so we have individual names, which could be proper of individuals or universal. And what do we do with them? We combine them. We join them together in what he calls a consequence or an affirmation. So, for example, a man is a living creature, or if he be a man, he is a living creature. The term living creature is a name, and man is another name. And if these come together right, then we have a true affirmation or consequence. If they don't go together, like if we say all men are blue, parts of us might be blue, our red blood cells when they're carrying carbon dioxide, but generally we're not blue, well, then that would be false. And Hobbes is going to say truth and falsity really only exist in speech. They are attributes of speech, not of things. Where speech is not, there is neither true nor falsehood. There can be error, but you can't say that there's untruth. So what is truth? The right ordering of names in our affirmations. He says that if you want to be able to do this, you need to develop yourself what he's going to call definitions, which are settled significations. And he uses geometry as a prime example of this. In the early modern period, geometry was very often appealed to in such a way. And he says, a lot of people have definitions and they're not any good. So we need to look at the definitions of other authors and correct them where they're negligently set down, or make new ones. Because if we start with bad definitions, erroneous definitions, they will multiply themselves and then lead us into absurdities, contradictions, where things don't make sense, right? And he says this is what happens when you trust yourselves to books. Not my book, of course. We'll talk elsewhere about how he frames his book as the only true and moral philosophy, right? But he wants to say, and actually he's got a great line here, words are wise men counters, they do but reckon by them, but they are the money of fools that value them by the authority of an Aristotle, a Cicero, or a Thomas, or any other doctor whatsoever, if but a man. So if we rely on, Aristotle or Cicero or Thomas Aquinas, we're probably getting bad definitions. We're going to screw up and we're going to get things wrong. So, definitions can be false. They might even be lacking, but it's really important that we get good definitions, and that's part of what Hobbes is going to try to supply us in the rest of Book 1 and Book 2 of Leviathan. Now, moving on, he is going to talk about ratio, or reason, this faculty that we have, and reasoning. And he says that reasoning is the faculty of reckoning in all things. So it's got a universal scope to it, right? And he says that the Greeks only had one word, logos, for both speech and reason. Not that they thought there was no speech without reason, but they thought there was no reasoning without speech. And the art of reasoning they called syllogism, which means summing up of the consequences of one saying to another. So Hobbes is going to say we can actually reduce the diversity of names to 4 general types. So what does reason work with? Well, matters or bodies. So he says something like living, sensible, rational, hot, cold, moved, quiet, all which name the word matter or body is understood. All of these are names of particular material things or general material things. A whole bunch of particulars under a universal. Second, and you might say, I'm not sure how this differs from what you just said, it may enter into account or be considered for some accident or quality which we conceive to be in it. Being moved, being so long, being hot. And then of the name of the thing itself, by a little change or wrestling, we make a name for that accident, like motion, heat, length, and the like. All these names are the names of accidents and properties by which one matter and body is distinguished from another. We call these abstract names, he said. Third, we bring into account properties of our own bodies. For example, when something is seen by it, we reckon not the thing itself, but the sight, the color, the idea of it in the fancy. When we hear something, we're not reckoning that, we're not reasoning about that, but the hearing or the sound only, which is our fancier conception of it by the ear. And then finally, this is really quite interesting, we have names of names, right? And you might say, well, what would that be? He says, well, here's some examples. General, universal, special, equivocal, affirmation, interrogation, commandment, narration, syllogism, sermon, oration. These are names of speeches. And all of these are ways in which we use language to talk about language, which allows us to think about language and to reason about language. In order for us to say, for example, a definition is a good one or a bad one, or an affirmation is true or false, we have to be able to talk about what a definition or an affirmation is. So we have to signify it in some way. So this is what we call, metalinguistic. It's a property of language that language can talk about itself. He is also going to talk about other kinds of names and conjunctions of names. For example, negative ones. He says these are used to signify that a word is not the name of the thing. So nothing is an example of that. Very general one. No man. No man is not signifying any particular human being. It's not about a book or a rock or a tie or a puppy dog, right? Infinite, indocible. Indocible means you can't teach this person. 3 want 4, right? 3 minus 4, negative 1, and the like. And he says these are nevertheless of use in reckoning or in correcting of reckoning. We need these. And then there's other names that are, as he's going to call it, insignificant sounds. Now, it doesn't mean that they don't make a sound. It means that they don't wind up being something we can use. So the ones that he's more worried about are what we could call absurdities or contradictory names. when we talk about an incorporeal body, right? It's a contradiction in terms, or incorporeal substance, according to Hobbes, or a round square, or iron water, or something like that. And he says there's a whole bunch of words like this, like in-powered virtue, in-blown virtue. These are as absurd and insignificant as a round quadrangle, right? So that's not of great use. And then we have what we can call neologisms, meaning names that are new, that are made up. So he says the schoolmen do this an awful lot. They're new and they don't have their meaning explained by a definition. There's already some examples earlier in the text, like, intelligible species. Hobbes says, it doesn't mean anything. You schoolmen, you scholastics, followers of Aristotle, are just kind of making up terms for whatever you want. You can't effectively use that in reasoning. He's going to finish this up by telling us that we need to be really careful with the names that we're using, because that is how we develop a proper understanding of matters. And so we have to take heed of words, which, besides the signification of what we imagine their nature, have a signification also of the nature, disposition, and interest of the speakers. So we can easily get mixed up about things. When we talk about virtues and vices, what one person calls wisdom, another calls fear. What one calls cruelty, another justice. One calls prodigality, another calls magnanimity. One gravity, another stupidity. So we got to be careful with these sorts of names. They might not be as usable if we don't pin them down with definitions, as he's going to do in part later on in the work. He also says we got to be really careful about metaphors and tropes of speech. Why? Because they are not that fixed. So we always want to reduce things as much as possible to what we could call a literal level. But at least with metaphors, like he says, they profess their inconstancy, whereas other terms that are more equivocal, not metaphorical, they don't. And so we can go wrong with them. So we see that in this discussion of names, he's very interested in what is it that we actually do with names. How can we get them right on multiple levels and in different ways?